So you've heard about it already a couple times. Here we go. It's called Love Gives, and it's going to be amazing. Every week until Christmas Eve, there's going to be an opportunity for us to do something that's not about us, and it's about people either locally or globally. And what I want to do as we begin that is I want to look at the heart that is behind that. And I was going originally to a real, what I thought was a safe place in the Bible to talk about that. Maybe you've heard about it. It's called the love chapter. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And my guess is you've been at a wedding where these words have been written and they sound so poetic and so nice, and they are. But I got to be honest with you, I found more of a challenge here than I thought I was getting. But that's okay. And what I want to do today is I want to share just the opportunity, but also the challenge that comes along with it as we begin this thing called Love Gives. What is behind that? What is the fuel that makes that go? Well, let me begin with a question, and maybe I'm talking more to guys than I am to girls, but maybe, you ladies, you have an answer to this question as well. Do you have a dream car that if money was no object and you would get that car? I have one of those. Let me show you an image of what that looks like. This is a Porsche Carrera. Actually, I had an uncle who worked for Porsche in Germany and drove Porsches and all of that and heard a lot of Porsche stories and things like that. And here's one of the harsh realities that I had to come to grips with when I was, choosing to do what I think God called me to do, which is, what we're doing right now. I came to the conclusion, I am never going to own a Porsche in my life. I'm just not going to do it. They're too expensive to get, too expensive to maintain. And this is let's just stare at the beautiful Porsche for a while. No, but this would be an expensive paperweight if it could not get up and go. But this thing has an engine that looks something like this. And it is every bit as beautiful, and it is very powerful, and it impels that car forward. So what is the engine that powers our activity over the next number of weeks? And to do that, I went to that chapter, the love chapter, and I want to read through a good section of it here because I think you're going to see a theme that emerges from it. There's just a surprise here with the challenge that comes along with it. So let's read through a lot of chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give my body over to hardship that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And at the end of the chapter, and now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is what? Is love. And when we think of this, maybe your thought, when I was coming to this chapter, I think, this just kind of sits there. And when we read it at weddings, it's just out of the context, right? Because this is part of a letter to the Corinthian church. And this is chapter 13. What that means is there are 12 chapters that come before it. There are also 3 chapters that come after it. And this is here for a reason. So let me give you a little bit of context about life in Corinth and why Paul may have included this chapter and the list and the description of love as he did. So Corinth was a city that was basically created. There wasn't, a long-standing tradition and people who lived in Corinth. The Roman Empire came and, they wanted to do some shipping around the Mediterranean. Well, the way to get a ship from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Western Mediterranean was a long way around a lot of what is modern-day Greece still. But there is this narrow place where you can come into a harbor, unload all your stuff. It's carried across 4 miles, put on another ship, and it would save time and money. Well, the Roman Empire realized, hey, that's a strategic place. Let's build a city there. That city is called Corinth. And it's in that place where people did not have long-standing traditions. Why did they actually go there? They went there to make it. They went there to be successful, to be productive. It attracted a lot of entrepreneurial type of people, and they had the opportunity to get wealthy in life, to be recognized in life. And it was also a place that was wild. It was wide open. It was a place that didn't have a lot of boundaries. In fact, there's an ancient word. It was called to Corinthianize someone. And what does that mean? That means to take away all boundaries, all, kind of sense of any kind of restrictions on behavior in any way. And that includes across the whole board. There was a mountain that overlooked Corinth, and on the top of that mountain there was a pagan temple, and every night 1,000 temple prostitutes would come down to the city of Corinth and ply their wares. It was just a wild place. In fact, things have been discovered from ancient Corinth where it says, what happens in Corinth stays. No, I'm just kidding. I made that part up. But it was that kind of place, where it was just wild and it was wide open. And here comes a guy named the Apostle Paul. And he travels around the Roman Empire, a lot of that Mediterranean world, and he goes to some of these key cities, and he begins something called the church, where people are told about who Jesus is and why he came. They put their hope and trust. They begin to gather. And Paul began many of those churches. Corinth is one of them. And out of all the churches he began, the church at Corinth is the most gifted of them all. They had remarkable gifts. And they were also hardworking. They did a lot of things. This was his most active, his most brilliant church. You know what else it was? His most troubled church. Because in his letters, he addresses some issues that were playing out there. But in a culture in which people were coming from far off from the things of God, even as they step into that relationship with God, they're bringing their junked up selves with them. And it's a journey, it's a process of us being transformed and made over. And so in this letter, Paul addresses a number of those issues, and then right in the middle of it, he has this chapter that is often referred to as a love chapter for the right reasons. But it's easy for us when we just have the context of this to say, was Paul, just asked one day, hey, what do you think love is? And Paul just kind of looked at the clouds for a while and reached for a guitar, started strumming. Love is patient and love is kind. Hey, that's not what this is about. He was not writing something that he hoped would be regular fare at our weddings, though that's a great place for it. He was writing to real people. And he was writing for people who were trying to understand what does it mean to walk together with God in the middle of all our giftedness, in the middle of all our busyness and involved aspects of our life. And he wants to make sure that the engine that powers all of their activity is the engine that God has in mind for us. And that engine is love. And so what he does is he kind of takes a little bit of a hand grenade and he tosses it in the middle of that church. You know why? Because that section that we read that says love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, and all those other aspects we think, oh yeah, that's so beautiful. But here's the thing, in the rest of this letter that he wrote, all those words have already been used to describe what life was like for those people seeking to follow Jesus in Corinth. There were times he says, you're proud and you envy one another. And there's strife there and you're not patient with each other. And so Paul, where did you come up with that list? I came up with the list in the church in Corinth and trying to describe what the engine that can drive the activity that we have for God to align that with the purpose of God. So with that context in mind, let's break some of this down and see how this could apply to people even today. So in verse 1 of chapter 13, the Apostle Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. The word tongues is also a slang word for languages, right? We talk about speaking in our mother tongue. And so what he's talking about here is, look, if I had the giftedness that could learn all the different languages of the whole known world, and even if I could speak in the language of the angelic world, but if it was not driven, if it was not fueled, if it was not powered by love, all I am is a resounding gong, a clanging cymbal. And remember, he's writing to incredibly gifted people. They had remarkable gifts, and he compliments them for that. But he's making sure that what drives those gifts and what is behind those gifts is the purpose that God has for them. Because all our gifts, whatever they are, whether we recognize it or not, are given by God for the purposes of God. But wouldn't you agree that sometimes in a junked up world with junked up people, we can take the things of God intended for the purposes of God and we can turn them inward toward ourselves so that they ultimately serve our own purpose? And that's what he's driving at when he says this resounding gong or clanging cymbal. What's wrong with that? We like a well-placed cymbal crash over here. So what is he talking about? In that pagan temple on the top of that mountain overlooking Corinth, what you did when you walked in there to worship in a pagan temple, you hit a gong and you just landed on a cymbal as you walked through there. And it was a way of indicating to the pagan gods, I am here. I am here to worship you. It was gaining the attention of those pagan gods. And so what Paul is saying is, we can take the gifts of God, but when we turn them toward ourselves, you know what we're doing? We're acting just like that. And we're taking what God has given to us for his purposes, and we're using them for our own, and maybe to a world around us, and maybe even we think to God, we say, hey, God, look at what I'm doing, and we're making a lot of noise thinking that that will attract his attention. But Paul instead says, love needs to fuel that. So to a group of people who are very gifted, we might ask the question, what's better than giftedness? And Paul's going to get on a theme here. You know what's better than giftedness? Growing in love is better than giftedness. Growing in love helps us to align all of our activity with the purposes of God and what he has called us to do all along. But then he goes on, and he says, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. So the prophecies and also fathoming mysteries, these are gifts of insight and wisdom and knowledge to be able to communicate with other people, maybe give them clarity and direction about their lives and explaining some of the complicated mysteries of life and faith. And he even talks about a miraculous kind of faith, right? The kind of faith that can move mountains. That is miraculous faith. But notice again, but if I do not have love, I am nothing. And when he says, I am nothing, it is a contradiction of something that apparently was happening in Corinth, and it can happen in this junked up world, where people were taking those kind of gifts and using them to basically say, I am something. Because after all, look at the feedback that I get from other people around me. Look at how much they admire me or compliment me or wish that they had the kind of gifts that I have. I am something because of what I'm doing. But Paul says, but if I don't have love, I am nothing. And we might wonder, Paul, where did you get this idea? Why are you putting such an emphasis on love? Where would you get an idea like that? He's taking us in the direction of helping us to understand that even when our faith can accomplish miraculous things, what's better than miracles? The kind of faith that can move mountains, what's better than that? You know, Paul's saying, you know what's better than that? Growing in love is better than that. And in fact, love is the miracle that is beyond all miracles. It's greater than anything else. And where he got that, let me back you up just a little bit. These are some of the words of Jesus on the night that he was in the upper room just before he was going to be betrayed. He's gathered together with his disciples. He knows what's coming. These are his last words. These are words of purpose and intent. These are important words. This is not a time to shoot the breeze. This is a time to be really focused. And what does he say? A new command I give you. And that word command, right? Who would say, hey, in addition to everything else that's in the Bible, let me give you something else that should be added to that. Nobody at that time would ever consider doing that. This image of a new command would have taken them back to when a guy named Moses walks off the top of Mount Sinai, and he's got 2 tablets with the 10 commandments on it. And here's Jesus in his last moments saying, a new command I give you. Who is this? This is God in the flesh. And here's what he says to them. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And so we don't get to define it. It's how he has loved us. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. The power of love to transform the world is beyond anything else. And sometimes we might get confused and say the opportunity to make a difference for God is about my giftedness. No, it's about love. And we might be on the other side of that spectrum, and we might look at other people and go, man, they're so gifted, I wish I could do that, and man, I can't do anything like that. And we may play the comparison game, which we always lose, and we might, just say, well, why bother doing anything? Because I can't, do what they do because of the giftedness. What Jesus is saying here is that's not the issue. That if you love people, you possess the power and the capability to do something greater than miracles. That's the power of love. It is the miracle beyond all miracles. And then the Apostle Paul says this, if I give all my possessions to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. And wouldn't you agree that the first couple things he mentions there are some pretty extreme acts? If I give everything that I possess to the poor, right? Who does that? But imagine doing that. How amazing that would be. Or giving my body over to hardship. There's one translation that actually says, if I sacrifice my body to the flames, talk about being burned out for a good purpose, right? It's doing incredible things for the sake of God. But if I do not have love, and now notice this, I gain nothing. And the word gain can also be the word earn. And could it be that in a junked up world, people who are coming from far off and trying to figure out this thing with God might think that to be in God's good graces, what I need to do is to do good things so that God loves me, because when he looks at me, he sees what I'm doing and he says, I love you. And yet that whole mindset runs directly counter to what the Bible calls the gospel. What is the gospel? Literally, it means the good news. But what it means in real terms of what took place in this world is that one day Jesus left heaven. He'd been there for all of eternity, eternally together in community with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit. And what drove him to leave that place? It was not power, and it was not desire to come and to contain or control. It was his love. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. It was his love that drove him. And he came down to this earth and he lived the life that you and I should have lived, but we can't because of who we are by nature and by choice. We miss it. And I say this a lot around here, and it's as true as ever. I don't measure up to my own standards, much less the standards of God. And so what are we to do? And we could easily turn in the direction of saying, well, I got to do something, so let me do some good things to prove to God that I love him and he will in turn love me. But you know what the gospel says? No, Jesus came down here, and in one day, after living the life that we never could, he sacrificed it on a cross, taking upon himself the sins of everyone who would put hope and trust in him. And then 3 days later, he arose from the dead. He rose again to conquer sin and death. And you know what the gospel says to you and to me and to everyone else? You are loved, period, end of sentence. It isn't about us gaining something, earning something by doing good things so that God will look at us and love us. God says, I love you. But what we do is such a great and fitting response to the love of God. But it's not about gaining, and it's not about earning. Could it be that we get our identity in our standing before God through the things that we do? And in a world like this, yeah, sometimes that can happen. But the gospel and God's love toward us says, no, he did it all, and he loves you. And because he loves you, he made a way for you to belong to him. And it's his doing from beginning to end. But now we get to respond. And when we respond, what we are doing is carrying out his very clear, very concise, and very specific direction for us. Love one another as I have loved you. No strings attached. Showing the love of God in real and practical ways. So what's better than being good? And I think by now, you know the answer to that question. Paul's on a roll. Growing in love is better. It's better than our giftedness. It's better even than our miraculous efforts. And it is better than even our good things sought to earn some favor with God. And so if we were going to take 1 Corinthians 14, this was written 13, was written 2,000 years ago, what if we were to put it into the 2024 language? What would it sound like today? And I wonder if it sounds something like this. If I have perfectly orthodox doctrine and stand on the right side of every issue and vote biblically, and if I lead a moral life but have not love, I am nothing. And if I look good and act good and perform great acts of faith but have not love, I'm only a posturing actor or a loudmouth influencer. That's hypothetically, maybe something like that could happen one day. If I set an example of commitment, sacrifice, and do one good deed after another but have not love, it does not benefit me in any way. Because what it's about is growing in love. The engine intended to power all of our activity in a relationship with God is the engine that is love. And so over the next several weeks, we're going to have all kinds of opportunities to do that. And it's amazing. But let's make sure that the reason for that in our own hearts and lives is that we want to follow the direction Jesus gave us. That we want our hearts to grow in love and not about us. And it's not about being good. It is about responding to the goodness and the love of God. So over the next number of weeks, here's the list of things we're going to do in Love Gives. And I hope you also got one of these devotionals when you came in. If you didn't get one on the way out, a couple things in here. One, week by week, there's going to be an opportunity after Sunday to go back to the passage and to make these things a little bit more personal and to go a little bit deeper and to apply it to your own specific life. And that's awesome. But on the inside cover is also that same list that you see up on the screen there. And here's what I'm going to invite you to do, and me, is I'm going to invite you to do something, and I'm going to invite you to give something. We are doing more Love Gives efforts this year than we've ever done, and that's awesome. And I'm not asking you to do everything. I'm asking you to do something. Some of us have more availability, some have less. That's okay. And I'm also going to ask you to give something. These efforts are funded by your giving specifically to Love Gives. And you see an envelope tucked in the back of the chair in front of you. 100% of what is given to Love Gives goes to these efforts. We don't keep one penny of it here. If we go over like we have done every year to this point, we give it to one of the efforts here. This year, we're going to give it to the school in Kenya. There's so many opportunities that they have before them. None of it stays here. All of it goes outside of ourselves. What is the cost this year? As I said, we're doing more than ever. It's also a higher number than ever. The need that we have is $155,000. That's outside of our budgets, above and beyond. I'm asking you to do something, and I'm asking you to give something. And what's behind all of this? Love grows when love gives. And this is an opportunity for us to respond to the love of God, to see that kind of love grow in our own lives when we understand that the engine powering all of that is simply the response to what God has given to us. And so we're going to try to make that real. And so today there's an opportunity for some boxes. Those first two services took a lot of them, but there's still some out there. But here's the power of a box. Can I just tell you one story of how this is more than just a principle, that this actually has the potential to touch people's lives. Earlier this year, in February of 2024, We had another time when we handed out some boxes. They were pink, and they were filled with supplies and taken to Nevada and dropped off at brothels in Nevada. Did he say brothels? Yes, he said brothels. And they were given to the people there. Here's what was behind that, was trying to communicate, you matter to us and you matter to God. Simple as that. No strings attached. And what we heard a little bit later was from one of the ladies. She was in the Reno area. And she got in touch with us and told us after receiving that box, spending some time in a devotional that was placed in that box, she decided to leave prostitution and go to work doing minimum wage work instead of that, because she had now engaged the love of God. Isn't it amazing that when we simply do what Jesus has called us to do and what he says has the power to touch the world, that it happens? And over the next number of weeks, we have that opportunity to do that, to respond to the love of God, to grow in love. Not just talk about it, not just know it, but to be personally involved in it. And may God transform these hearts of ours. May we grow in love, because love grows when love gives. Would you bow your heads together with me as I pray? So God, we are so thankful for who you are, and we're thankful for your patience with us. And God, sometimes we just bring our own junk to our relationship with you. Thank you for the challenges of life that call us to just align our hearts and lives with who you are and all that you have done for us. And God, during this season, may it be a great celebration of your great love for us. And God, may we respond to that in real and personal ways. And may that touch lives in ways that only you can. And God, inside of us, may it grow us in love. That we would simply do what you have called us to do, and on the other side of that, see you do great things in us, through us, around us. But God, help us to know, and not about us, that it is about you and every single person who matters so much to you. So thank you for that opportunity, and thank you for your amazing grace that has said, I love you. May we respond to that in all the right ways and give you the glory that you and you alone deserve. So we ask and pray all of that in Jesus' name. Amen.